Hello, and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer. Since October 7th, 2023, it is fair to say that Israel, Israelis, and those around the world who follow events here have been relentlessly focused on war. War in Gaza, war in Lebanon, war, of course, in Iran, and beyond. Now, it's not as if public attention was sharply focused on Palestinian human rights in the occupied territories previously. But over the past 3 years, with war constantly raging and a far right-wing government in place in Jerusalem, it has probably been lower on the agenda than ever before. And then, periodically, such as the recent firestorm over a New York Times article detailing sexual abuse of Palestinians, it seems to be all that anyone can talk about. My guest today leads an organization that always follows what is happening in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and works to counter and fight what it describes in its mission statement as the essence of the apartheid regime in place between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Yuli Novak is the executive director of the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem. Before that, from 2012 to 2017, she was executive director of the NGO Breaking the Silence. Yuli is also the author of a memoir called Who Do You Think You Are? Yuli Novak, welcome to the Haaretz Podcast.
Hey, thank you.
Yuli, I don't think there are many Israelis who have not heard of B'Tselem, the organization that you lead. It has a very short name in Hebrew and a long name in English, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. For our listeners around the world, can you describe briefly what the mission and purpose of your organization is and exactly what it does?
So B'Tselem, as you said, is a Israeli human rights organization. It's been around for 35 years, more than 35 years now, documenting, researching, analyzing violations of human rights of Palestinians under Israeli control and by Israel. We are here to identify the crimes, to name them, and also as human rights advocates to call for accountability and basically take part in the struggle to stop the abuse and oppression of Palestinians by Israel.
Before that, you led another organization that was even more controversial than the one that you are leading now, called Breaking the Silence. Both groups, though, are basically accused on a regular basis of supplying ammunition for Israel's enemies. Breaking the Silence had a similar mission.
Breaking the Silence is also an organization who work to expose violations of human rights and abuse of Palestinians. It is a very different organization in the sense that of Israeli soldiers who collect testimonies from the perpetrators themselves and work very much within the Israeli discourse, I would say. And B'Tselem is much more, I would say, classic, but nothing classic today because the world is changing and we're changing with it. But human rights organization, in a sense, first and foremost, we're not only Israelis. Our team is combined from Israelis, Jewish Israelis, and Palestinians from all over. So from within 48. Palestinians that are citizens of Israel from the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. And we are working together. And in that sense, it's always been a very unique structure within the Israeli framework. I would say that in the past few years, especially in the last 3 years, when polarization and separation and alienation between Israelis and Palestinians is at its peak, the ability to work together and to, not from two different sides, but from really one angle that see human beings and try to protect human beings, is a very challenging but also very, I think, important mission by itself. Just the fact that there is an organization in Israel, and there are a few, but not more than a few, that do this kind of mutual work of resisting oppression and fighting for justice.
And it's also become more complicated because we're not only arguing these days over what is right and wrong morally, but what are the facts? What is truth? We live in now sort of a post-truth society in which you're not just fighting with somebody over whether what happened is right or wrong, but whether it happened at all.
Yes and no. I would say, right, we are in this post-truth reality. I think that the situation that we see today in Israel-Palestine is somehow more horrific and more simple than that, because most of the facts are known, and even if not most of them, what is known is enough. Is so harsh, is so unbearable, so illegitimate reality, and I'm talking about the Israel conduct, again, in different spaces, which we probably talk about, right? In Gaza, in the West Bank, in the prisons. What we already know, the things that people saw, the pictures that came out, the testimonies that came out, I think the discussion is much less around the world, is not about knowing or not knowing, is much more about the meaning of what we see and give it and to understand what we see in front of our eyes. That, I would say, the global or Western discussion. Within Israel, the Israeli government is making a huge effort as part of its propaganda kind of machine to deny some of the truths that are completely known today, and to deny mostly Israel is to see them, to see these truths. And that we can talk separately, but I would say it's much less a question whether things are happening or not happening, and much more what it means for all of us, and first and foremost for the victims.
I went in that direction because I was recently in the United States, and all people in the Jewish community or who follow Israeli events closely, all they could talk about was this Nicholas Kristof piece in the New York Times, the silence that meets the rape of Palestinians, alleging the sexual violence against Palestinian detainees by Israeli forces based on testimonies, human rights reports, and investigations. And the discussion wasn't about the morality, it was about the truth and what is the truth. So I'm interested in what your take is on the accusations of unsubstantiated reporting from critics, people taking sides, attacking it, defending it. How did that piece and the debate around it outside Israel and inside Israel, how did that hit you?
This piece was super influential and important, and we appreciate this journalistic work. But it is important to say that this knowledge was already out for quite a while. We at B'Tselem published 2 years ago a report based on testimonies of dozens of prisoners who got released from Israeli detentions post October 2023. And all of them told us again and again the same stories about what happened in different facilities, right? We're talking about, back then we checked 16 different detention facilities around Israel, both military and civilians. They all talked about abuse, serious abuse, ongoing torture, physical and mentally. Starvation is something that became a policy, right? Denied of medical treatment is something that became a policy. Also sexual violence, something that we heard again and again and again. And we at B'Tselem are not the only one who published about those things. And survivors of those detention centers, or what we called and identified as torture camps, came out and talked again and again. So I understand how it works, and you need to get to some kind of peak, and then you need some very respectful and awarded journalist from the New York Times to come out and publish it and do very good work, right? But the issue is that this reality is already out there. And even if you take half of it down, like really say, okay, half of it they are lying, though I don't think they are lying, they are survivors of torture camps. These people are not about lying. Most of them have a really hard time to even talk about what they went through. And one more thing important about those people, they all got released. You see that the logic of the system is to take people, mass arrest of Palestinians while we're sitting here and talking. There are close to 10,000 Palestinians who are held in these detention centers, in these torture camps. Even for me as an Israeli, it's hard to grasp it because, I grew up, torture camps is something that happened somewhere else, right? You tell me that Israel is the country I live in is building this network of torture camps and holding thousands of people regularly there, and most of them will get released without knowing what they even were taking for, right? If there is a reason at all, because some of them came in like mass arrest in Gaza and in other places. So I'm saying all this because I think when we get into this discussion, we need to understand the background. Now, Israel's reaction to this piece in the New York Times was unique and not unique in its scale, but the propaganda kept going and denying it. Things that are not only obvious from testimonies of victims, we also can listen to the Israeli officials who run this system. And you don't need to guess, because the one person that is responsible over the Israeli jail system is Itamar Ben-Gvir. Itamar Ben-Gvir is, as we all know, is the most hardliner right-wing politician that Israel ever had.
He's our Minister of National Security, in charge of the police, in charge of the prison system.
This guy came, even before October 7, he came with an agenda, and he said, I'm going to change the prison system in the way it regards to Palestinian prisoners, right? And he did, and he started it before October 7, and in that sense, October 7 was a catalyst and also opened up an opportunity for him and others to implement their agenda, and not only to make the policy according to their nationalist, racist, in the case of Itamar Ben-Gvir, I would call even sadistic agenda, but also really to change the system itself. So the people that they appointed are the people that they are their people, right? And then they brag about what they're doing. Itamar Ben-Gvir himself and the Israeli prison system had, I think, not less than 5, maybe even 6 PR pieces in mainstream media, TV outlets, in Channel 12, Channel 13, each and every channel came into the prison system and was escorted by Itamar Ben-Gvir or others to show the Israeli public actually the abuse. So they would use so many words for it, but you can see it. And the humiliation, the notion of revenge that the Israeli prison system turned into. So if to go back into the discussion within Israel, I think Israelis have a really hard time to believe that that's what happened, even though that cracks a bit. And worldwide, again, I would say from my encounter with people around the world, they already know. They already know. And some of them really was born to love Israel, just like I did, and probably you and most of us here, is struggling at the moment with the current reality.
It's interesting that it took charges of sexual abuse in this case, and going back to the last, I would say, human rights scandal in Israel about Sde Teman, the prison camp, that also sort of revolved around sexual abuse. Somehow the violence and other, abuse, starvation, death, breaking bones doesn't hit the public in the same way as these accusations. It's a strange phenomenon.
It's true. I gave it a lot of thought, and I have to say it's a matter for social psychologists to look at. But one thing I can say about this sexual violence and occasions of rape, unlike other forms or some forms of violence, I think how it exposes not only the use of the power relations and the fact that this kind of practices, not only in jail and against Palestinians, sexual violence in essence is about domination or humiliation or taking use of somebody else's body to your enjoyment, whatever. You cannot excuse it by security, right? You cannot excuse it by any other. It's the thing itself. It's the violence in its pure kind of form. And it also says something not only about the victims, but about the perpetrators and why they're doing it and what the purpose of this kind of violence. So I would say it's very hard to look at yourself in the mirror when you know that hundreds and thousands of people work in these detention centers. They are normal people. We meet them everywhere. Most of them, even if they are not physically taking part in abuse and torture, they see it. They see it. I'm sure of that. These are real people. What does it say about them? Again, I'm not saying that each and every one of them raped someone, but what does it say about them? And yeah, Sde Teman in that sense, I think, is terrible, amazing kind of moment to look into that and to see What we have there, we have a rape that was shot on video, taking place inside the prison. We all saw it, this horrible video that was leaked, not leaked. That's not the important story. The story is that we have this rape. The people, the perpetrators were arrested. 2 years later, they are not only freed and the accusation were cancelled because of the public campaign, but also the Israeli prime minister stand and say they are our heroes. So turn them into example citizens, right? That is real, I think, a moment that shows us something about where Israel society and Israeli discourse got to, where you see people who are basically rapists. Again, I haven't seen the file, but they were accused of rape someone based on evidence that were there, that some of them we saw. And at the end of the story, they become the heroes, not because they didn't do it, because they did.
So do you think Israeli national character is changing over the course of the time since October 7th, or by having this far right-wing government in place? Is it something, again, you said it was a catalyst to the events of October 7th. Do you feel like there's been a big change, I guess, in acceptance or ability to look at this kind of behavior and say, yes, if we don't want these things to happen to us again, like October 7th, we have to be tough. We have to fight by the rules of the jungle. Is this something that you didn't see, again, in your previous incarnation, 2015, 2017, with Breaking the Silence? Is it a different Israel that you're seeing now?
Yes and no. It is different because things have changed. And I think the last 3 years showed us something and turned all of us into something different. First, because of October 7th, which was probably the day itself and the attack itself, Hamas attack and its outcome, and the experience for Israelis. I think all of us probably will, or most of us will hold this day as the scariest and the most traumatic day of our lives. I know I will. And the second thing is the genocide. A society that is conducting this kind of scale of violence against other people, what we identify as genocide, I think is a different society. But I would say we haven't got there out of nowhere. In order to get there, the conditions to get to where we are as a society, the conditions was building up throughout, I would say now close to 80 years of living under a regime of separation, of hyper-militarization, with military occupation as part and parcel of our existence here, with extreme violence against Palestinians, something that we learned to accept towards Palestinians in Gaza in previous kind of rounds of fighting, right? With hundreds and thousands of casualties that just we went on. I'm talking about 2009 and 2014 and others. And also in the West Bank, which we accepted this policy or reality throughout the years. So I would say we were, living under apartheid for so long, in a way prepare you in the most devastating way I can say it. It builds up your blindness. It builds up as a society, it build up our fears and anxiety and the notion that the only way we can be safe is by oppressing the Palestinians, that it is a zero-sum game. It's us or them. That's the basic story that I grew up upon as a leftist Zionist, right?
Fairly mainstream, right? Your background, you're not from some sort of radical left.
No, not at all. I would say mainstream liberal Zionist. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Rabin was our hero. And what I didn't saw throughout my education and then also when I joined the army is how much of my understanding of this place is built on the ability not to see other people or to see them as the ultimate other, that there is no way we can live together and that there is no way I can live securely without the best case scenario is total separation from the Palestinians. There is no other way. It's something that really limits your imagination and your ability to see reality and the options that there are there. And also to accept violence and militarism as something that is just, okay, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's our destiny, right?
And you've written against the new death penalty law, saying it's kind of the ultimate expression of that.
the death penalty law and
which distinguishes, just for listeners who aren't familiar, right, distinguishes between Palestinians and Israelis in terms of who would get a death penalty sentence for committing terrorism.
Exactly. Israel is already executing Palestinians, also inside prisons. You should say something about it. In the past 3 years, 88 Palestinians that we know their identities died in Israel custody. That is insane number. In the years before that, we're talking about 1 or 2, right? So, which you might be able to explain by diseases and just, a normal situation. But 88 people in 3 years, when we know under which condition that they are being held, and that they are being denied of medical treatment, and that they are being starved, and they are being treated violently. That's practically also a way, I'm saying it very carefully, but also a way to execute Palestinians, right? You're putting them into these detention centers, and they are dying in dozens. To go back to the death penalty law, it just marks you the direction that Israel is taking. And that is to more oppression on Palestinians, regarding less Palestinians as human beings and that deserve human rights, basic human rights. And in the overall, going farther from the notion of international law, of respecting human rights, of something that was built throughout the last century in the what it called liberal democratic West, right? So really going into the different direction, focusing on one group, not on the whole society, but focusing on Palestinians.
Let's talk about words and terms for a minute. You were one of the first to use the apartheid word. It seems like a long time ago when calling sort of the different systems of laws and limitations for citizens here, calling it by the A word of apartheid. That seems to be broken through. You hear people very close to the mainstream now, mainstream center left in Israel, using the word apartheid. In your memoir, you talked about how hard it was for you to grapple with the issue of Zionism, considering yourself not to be a Zionist anymore. And now the focus is on the G word, is on the word genocide. And less than a year ago, your organization came out with a report that had genocide in the title. It was a big deal to use the word genocide. And now it's kind of a feature of a lot of the reports coming out from B'Tselem and used abroad. Some people are saying that, you feed the fire of the accusations of genocide. Can you just tell me a little bit, how difficult was it to cross that bridge of saying, yes, genocide is happening, why you, I guess, and your entire organization decided to use that word, and the backlash that you face for doing it?
Yes, of course. First, I would say not B'Tselem, not me personally, were the first to use and to characterize Israel as an apartheid, nor to identify the genocide. Many did this before us, mostly Palestinians, but also international human rights.
I'm talking about Jewish Israeli organizations using those terms.
That's true. So the decision for us was not to name it genocide and not to use or not use the word. It was about professionally identifying what we see. We researched for almost 2 years since the genocide started, since October 2023. We researched and documented what takes place on Gaza and kept publishing information and investigations about what's going on there. And I have to say that for many of us, it became quite clear very early in the stages of the attack over Gaza that we're first seeing something completely different than anything we saw before, not only first and foremost in its scale, but also in the intentions that were very clearly put forward by the Israeli officials and both political leadership and the military itself about what it is doing there, what Israel is about to do to Gaza and what it is doing to Gaza. And that is basically to destroy it, if I'll say it shortly. I mean, we all heard Bougie Herzog, the president, standing there and say it's an entire nation that is responsible for the crimes of October 7, and Netanyahu sending in soldiers to fight, Israeli soldiers to fight, saying, remember what Amalek did to you, which for Jews around the world, but first and foremost for Israelis who went to Israeli schools. This is a dog whistle to say Amalek. It's basically saying leave no one behind, including children and women and the trees. Like destroy everything.
And turning it into a holy crusade, a religious war, not a war of self-preservation, self-defense, but some sort of a religious mission.
Yes, also, but I'm talking about the practice itself. And then the military came in, and we heard from the commanders and then from the soldiers on the ground what they are going to do and what they are doing. And we saw the videos on TikTok of what they are doing, right? So, and we saw the mass destruction of Gaza. Genocide is not only a crime by international law, it is. But even before it was legislated in international law as a crime, genocide is also a phenomena, a political and historical phenomena of extreme mass violence, right? And in that sense, it happened before the Holocaust and before the Genocide Convention. And what it holds at its base is actually an attack that is oriented to destroy a group as such, intentionally.
I think that's where people argue the point in Israel, that the point that they argue, on the pro-Israeli defense side, that this is not an intentional elimination of a people. This is a defense of a country.
Yeah, intentionally, but also it's important as a group. That means that you don't need necessarily to kill each and every person in this group, but you need to destroy conditions that enable them to do that. And when we at B'Tselem looked at our genocide, at this specific attack over Palestinians, so first we have the intention. The intention is there, and again, it was said at the first days of the attack, right? The Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, Gallant, came and said it, and they were, also because of that, they were accused, and now they are wanted by the ICC, the International Criminal Court, for action that were taking place throughout the genocide. But so the intention, I think, is there, and it's one of the easiest cases to see the intention. Now you have the practice itself, and each and every genocide throughout history had its own kind of model, how it worked. It's always different practices. And in our case, we see and we research and find four main elements to that. One is the mass killing. We're talking about more than 70,000 people who got killed till now, more than 20,000 minors and injured, hundreds of thousands injured, of course. The second is the mass destruction, the photos that we see of the entire cities that were ruined. The third is the mass displacement of people. We're talking about 90% of the Gaza population, 1.9 million people who are still refugees, actually. Most of them don't have homes to come back to, right? And the fourth, which is important element, it is the destruction of social and political fabric and life. And that is about destroying the education, destroying the medical system, destroying the notion of family. What is family in Gaza? What is community? What it means? And that, I say it's important because it's not only about destroying the present, it's also destroying the future of these people. And when you take all this together, again, with the ongoing incitement to genocide that we hear in the political discourse and in the public discourse, I think it's hard for me to say, but we're looking at one of the most paradigmatic genocide in history. Once you see it and you really look at it, there's no real question about what we're seeing. And I'm not talking only at the legal level, but first and foremost in the what sort of violence we're facing now.
So I don't want to say you're comfortable with genocide, but you're comfortable using the term genocide for what you see happening here.
I'm doing what is necessary. And for me, when you see a genocide, and that I'm saying as an Israeli, as a granddaughter of Holocaust survivor, and someone who grew up learning about genocide, our genocide from the other side, I think that's my obligation to say it once I see it.
Yuli, I want to wrap up our conversation with talking about change and how to reverse the tide, which you describe and sounds almost impossible to reverse. But so let's talk about both outside factors and inside factors. You have been more than once accused of being a traitor because in your previous job and in your current job, you provide evidence material for those who are holding Israel accountable on the outside. You mentioned the ICC, the criminal courts. We've got these warrants. I'm interested in your opinion as to whether these outside pressures, the turning Israel into a pariah internationally because of its behavior, if you think that that is powerful in terms of moving the needle. And after that, I want to talk about the internal elections. But first, let's talk about the international implications and whether you think that these kind of events overseas, the warrants, the pressure, the boycotts, the not letting people into the country, if you think that that may push change inside Israel or just cause Israelis to circle the wagons more and resist it.
Let's start with reality. What I see now is that it's the second option, that it's basically because the Israeli government and Israelis at the moment, to close up even more. I don't know what will happen in the future, but I would say this: apartheid and genocide and ongoing oppression and violence of that sort is not an internal issue. A regime of apartheid and genocide is anywhere around the world is something that's supposed to be unacceptable because it has to do with the core of what it means to be human and the notion of human rights. And when the world allow a system like the Israeli system to keep going as a legitimate system while conducting those crimes, the one who are suffering from it, they're first and foremost the Palestinians, right? But it has to do with each and every one of us, and I would say with each and every person around the world. You allow genocide to take place in Gaza, you turn genocide into something that is normal, that is acceptable. You allow the apartheid to take place in South Africa or in Israel. You make apartheid something acceptable, and it's not. And in that sense, I'm saying the first question is not what it will do to Israelis, but what are the obligations of human beings around the world, and including Israelis and Palestinians, right? I think we're part of it. It's not. And I would say you see those kinds of regime. That's how I grew up. You see this, you fight it. You fight for justice. How it will affect the Israeli public, I really don't know. I think the Israeli public went very far, mostly in the past 3 years, into this deep place of anxiety, trauma, and numbness in regard to other people suffering. You know, some of the hardest and the harshest moment for me was to hear Israel is sometimes people I love and cherish saying things like there are no innocent people in Gaza and every child in Gaza will grow up to be a terrorist and all kind of things that just show you where, and I'm talking about, you know, not people from my family, people from my like social circles. And that is a genocidal discourse. Now, we almost don't identify it anymore because it became so normal within Israel. When I'm saying that Israel is going through a process of becoming, the Israeli Jewish society becoming more and more genocidal, that's what I'm talking about. Not only the fact that hundreds of thousands of soldiers took part in it, some of them with understanding, some of them without understanding the overall of what they're doing. I'm also talking about how much hurting other people and dehumanize other people is becoming normal to us. And I think in that sense, I really don't know. I'm sure Israel society will come out of it. But if I look at history and on other societies that committed genocide, two things that you can see. First, usually in real time, they do not recognize the meaning of what they are doing. They know the facts sometimes, the actions, but they don't understand it as a genocide. And the second, it usually takes a lot of time, sometimes decades, to start and reconcile and recognize what you did. So I wouldn't count on the mass of Israelis to understand that. I do work, me and my team and my colleagues work tirelessly in order to try and say it again and again and again. But the reaction for most people, they just really don't want to hear, which again, I can maybe understand the the psychological mechanism and that leads you there, but I cannot accept it.
Well, that mass of Israelis you talk about are going to the polls in a few months. You're not an electoral political organization per se, but how do you view the upcoming elections? You've written pretty harshly against Yair Golan, who is the new great hope of the Israeli left. to change things, that you're not so happy with the way that he's framing what he sees as the direction to go in terms of the Palestinians. Are you optimistic that perhaps the next elections will turn the tide? And how important is it? I mean, I've said before on the podcast, I hear so many Israelis saying this is it, these elections, if they don't really replace this government with something very different, that they're gone, they're leaving the country, which is something that you did for a short period of time. That the things that you've described in this podcast make it so that they don't want to be part of this country anymore.
Let's talk about the spectrum that we're looking at in this election. So from one side, we have something like the current government, right, which is extreme right-wing, also messianic, also kind of really they're hardliners. And on the other side, we have the option of Bennett together with Yair Golan, Yair Lapid, and others. What is this other side? First of all, a full support for the genocide. None of them are standing up against those practices. And second, the notion of apartheid, the notion of separation and superiority and control over the Palestinians is also something that is in complete agreement there. So, and that's what I said about and wrote about Yair Golan, that when we're talking about, there is something, and I'll try to end with this. Democracy and apartheid and genocide doesn't go together. We can keep telling ourselves that we're a democracy, but if Israel holding half or almost half of its population, the population under its control, without the right to go and vote for the system that governs them, it's not a democracy. If Israel, throughout the decades, operated and demographically engineered the space in order to make sure that we will preserve a Jewish majority within specific area, it's not a democracy. And I spent some time in South Africa and I learned about apartheid there. And one of the things that I heard there that were shocking to me is that they kept saying back then, the white people in South Africa during apartheid kept saying they were the only democracy in Africa. Now, they were a democracy within the borders of the state that they identify, with taking out the black and colored people, the non-white people, the people that they didn't want outside, not calling them citizens. And then they were the only democracy in Africa. And you're smiling because you also know the reference that I'm talking about, and I'm sure that everybody that listened to us. And also another notion that I kept hearing there, and that goes to something that we talked about if we won't have apartheid, they will throw us to the sea. The black people will throw us to the sea. So I'm talking about the limits of the imagination. And when we're talking about, Yair Golan can call his party the Democrats, but you're running in an election of an apartheid state. This is an apartheid parliament. So, I would say, if you ask me if I prefer Ben-Gvir or Naftali Bennett, I prefer the more liberal, less hardcore, sadistic, really scary type of person over. But I don't think it's going to change. I'm not counting on the coming election to change something fundamental. I think we're choosing between a bit more liberal apartheid and the ongoing genocide into a very harsher reality of even more genocide that will even more spill over into other areas under Israeli control.
So those who dream that if we just get rid of Bibi Netanyahu, everything will be okay, you think they're being unrealistic?
I think that you need to identify the problem and then to say what the solution is. If the problem is the Palestinians and their existence, so maybe Netanyahu and maybe others can do a good job in getting rid of the Palestinians, either by killing them, or by moving them around, or by ethnic cleansing them, or whatever some people suggest, or total separation, whatever, build a really, really, really big wall. But if the problem is, and the way I see it, is a system that is built on violence, on separation, and on superiority of one people over the others, so no, to elect Naftali Bennett or Gadi Eisenkot won't save us.
Yuli Novak, it's not easy to do what you do, pointing out the problems and the deep, deep issues underlying the reality that we're living here. Good luck to you.
It's harder to live under this condition than to identify them. we all live under this regime, and this is for me much harder than to name it.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast, naming it, describing it, and talking about it.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Yuli Novak, and to producer and editor Adi Shacham. If you'd like to continue to listen to the podcast and never miss an episode, subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave us a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all of the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.